Yo, yo, yo. So Dan is going to be with us momentarily, right? We're here now. We're getting ready to, let me see what's up here. All right, good. You guys can see me. So we are doing today's deep dive, the second live cast with Dan Antonelli. Now, we're talking about his company and his brand and what they do for us as service companies and brands. And it has specifically to do with the branding and winning your customers at the street, right? One of the things that Dan and I talk about, and we're going to talk a lot about today, is what if more than half your job was done before you ever showed up? The customer knew what your colors were, they knew what your avatar was, they knew who you were, they knew what you stood for, they knew what the marketing aspects were, they already had an idea as to what the service guarantee was going to be. And if there was a problem, they know that you stand behind it because you look and feel like a national company, even if you're only two trucks. What if all of that job was done before you even showed up, right? We're going to do deep dive today. And the beautiful part about this is Dan's not a marketing agency. He's not trying to sell you on running your PPC, or he's not trying to transition you to LinkedIn ads or Google ads or Facebook ads. We are literally talking about the consumer psychology around what the expectations are about you before you show up. And I am super happy to have Dan here because there's a huge value add to the group. And there's nobody that's done more HVAC business branding in the world than Dan with KickCharge. So Dan, welcome, man. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks, buddy. It's great to be here. It's awesome to talk about my favorite subject.
Yeah, so I'm going to touch on some things here. So on the intro, you see Dan's created over 200 brands, right?
Well, 200 HVAC brands, about 1,500 brands in total.
Wow. Okay. Well, I want to talk about that too. I didn't realize you did more than HVAC. That's pretty dynamic.
Yeah.
And then you've got more truck wrap awards than anybody. You've literally got more than 20 award winners in HVACR National Magazine, right? So we're going to want to talk a bit about that because that's freaking awesome. You've got more than 20 Truck of the Month awards. Something I want to talk about that we'll cover is what is a big small business brand, right? And then more than 250 design awards. So Dan, go ahead, and I'm going to give an intro after you talk about how we met and about how I grew to trust you with our own material. But go ahead, and why don't you talk about how you got into the business, what KickCharge stands for, what you guys do, what your team does, and how you've been successful for more than 24 years.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I started 15 years old. I grew up as someone who was really into signs and truck lettering. So I wanted to be a sign painter. So I would do truck lettering. I was painting signs and lettering trucks. I did my first truck when I was probably 15 years old, worked in a sign shop. And then I'm in high school and I'm like, I really want to be a sign painter, Mom and Dad. And like, nah, that's not going to happen. You're going to have to go to college. So I went to college and I studied advertising. And I learned graphic design and things like that. But I was working in New York City for about 5 years as a designer. And I just missed the interaction with small businesses. I really missed helping them work on their business, work on their brands, work on their vehicles. You know, I started doing websites back then. So while I was working full time, I started the business, and within about 6 months, I had enough business to basically be able to sort of quit my day job. But it was, you know, it was a pretty tough hustle. You know, it was like 80, 90-hour weeks for about 6 or 7 months to do both jobs, and then we finally had enough. And I worked out of the home for probably about 8 or 9 years. I started the company in 95, so we're actually going to be coming up on 25 years, which is cool. And then, you know, I had actually employees come into my house working in my basement, which started getting a little awkward. And then I finally got an office. And then I just built this office about 2 years ago. So we have a 5,000 square foot facility, and we have, I think at this point, we have about 18 or 19 employees. So we do everything from brand development, we do vehicle wrap design, and then we also do digital marketing and traditional agency services like brochures, collateral, print advertisements, things like that.
Yeah. So before we go into really what, you know, winning the customers from the streets means, I want to touch on a big misnomer that I've personally been through, because when I was building my company, right? Everybody I talked to, and it's something you're going to talk about today, said, don't name the company after you. And there's various reasons. You can become associative to the brand, et cetera. It becomes hard to sell, things that you're going to talk about. But we ended up putting enough energy in to make it work. But we used an online logo design company. And so it sounds like we got pretty lucky that we didn't have any trademark issues, or probably because it had to do with my last name.
Yeah.
But a lot of guys doing this industry, and a lot of the posts and forums recommend, is that they save a few bucks by doing like a Fiverr type logo design. And although it comes out pretty, and I've heard the horror stories about building a brand for 2 or 3 years on one of those logos and truck wraps, and then just 2 or 3 years later to end up in a lot of trouble. So tell us from your perspective what the background is around not measuring twice and cutting once in sense of that, and just going with an online cheap Fiverr type logo design.
Yeah, I mean, listen, I've got dozens of examples of our clients' brands being resold to people. And then they go ahead and they wrap 3 trucks, they do a website, they put uniforms, logo on the uniforms, and then the lawyers get involved with cease and desist or demanding damages, and it gets really ugly, and it's sad. So like, what's your recourse at that point? You're going to go back to Fiverr and try to get the guy that's from overseas to reimburse you for the 5 truck wraps that you had to strip off and all the stuff you had to throw in the garbage? Like, good luck with that. So to me, it's like, invest in it. Just hire a professional. Like, I'm not saying you have to hire us, just hire somebody that's professional. Know that you have to buy original artwork. So make sure that that's part of the question you ask the design agency. Is it original artwork? Do not use clip art for your brand. So there's like a couple of the biggest companies in the HVAC world are using clip art for the logo. You know what the problem is with that is I could literally open up next door to them with the same logo and they have absolutely no recourse because it's public domain. So make sure that the artwork that you're getting is original. And then, obviously if it's owned by someone else, that's going to be a problem down the road. The nice thing about our reputation within the design world is that everyone knows our work. And as soon as somebody steals our work, it's not very long that we find out. And then we send the information to the client, and the client gets the lawyers involved because the logo is trademarked. And now you're dealing with a logo that you can't even use, that you've already wrapped all these trucks with, and all the stuff has to come off. It doesn't matter that that company is in another state. It doesn't matter. All it matters, federal trademark supersedes everything. So when you have a federal trademark on a logo, there's no one in the country that can use that logo. So, all our clients get their logos trademarked when we're finished. That protects them from thieves from Fiverr and these crowdsourcing sites. It's sad that people just take somebody's intellectual property and then think that they can just use it, and I get sad sometimes because sometimes they don't know that they bought something that belongs to someone else. So yeah, it's just.
Look, one thing I want to kind of clarify there is I don't think anybody's bad or has the wrong intent. Like, what hurts me.
No,
look,
absolutely.
Everything. I've got this industry to thank for everything. My house, my family, everything, like everything that we've grown. And when I started, I wasn't trying to do the wrong thing. Right? We did a crowdsourcing type website. And again, for a logo design, and we didn't end up in any trouble probably because it had to do with my last name. Mm-hmm. But as I've seen the last 7 years being in business, I'm 30 now, I started when I was 23, is that people all the time, I would say 50% of the time end up, and it's not that they had bad intent. Look, most of these HVAC service companies, plumbing service, electrical, they're bootstrapping from the beginning. So if you have a beautiful logo that can be made for you for $200, you think that you're getting a steal. The problem is after you grow, because of good service, because of, even if it's pretty, you do disrupt the market a bit. The problem is year 2, year 3, when you have to uninvest those dollars and peel it off, right?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And listen, we feel bad sometimes because it's sometimes they're the first to learn that their logo belongs to someone else. Like, imagine that phone call. Right? After you've wrapped 5 trucks and you're using this brand, everyone in your community knows you with this brand. And then you get the phone call from the lawyer saying, you know what? That's our trademark brand. You're going to have to cease and desist, and you're going to have to redo everything. I mean, what is it? $3 or $4 grand per vehicle just for that alone? Like, I had one of our brands get ripped off and the guy did like everything. and he had no idea that the logo was stolen. And I felt bad for the guy. But again, I hired somebody that was not reputable, and I don't know what to say. Like, I feel bad, but that's part of what we always try to preach is, listen, just hire a professional, invest in it. It's something that will pay dividends. What's the lifespan of a logo? 10, 15 years? Like, really, like, how much is this going to cost per year? Like, so try to think about a long-term investment, what that brand is worth, and then make the right investment from day one, so that you don't have to go through stuff like that and redo things.
So I wanted to touch on that because I think that's important for everybody in this group to know, and everybody that listens to the podcast and everybody that listens to this content going forward. I think it's important to know, that's a good point, is how long does a logo last? 20 years, 15 years, right? So what is that? So let's say it costs 10 grand to do everything right and have everything synonymous and have everything consistent. What does 10 grand cost over a 20-year period? So I think I wanted to stamp that at the beginning, because I think that's a mistake that a lot of contractors make.
Yeah. And we get a lot of rebrands because they've grown to a certain point and they realize that their brand is holding them back and they're ready to go to the next level. But it would be great if they could have done it right from day one. And when we have a blank canvas to start with day one, those are typically the best brands that we do, because there isn't any baggage, so to speak. You're starting from scratch. It's like when we name a company and we decide what the brand strategy is going to be, I'm not worried about what colors they used to be or anything like that. So it's always nice if you can start fresh, or just make sure that when you start it, you invest into it. So it's like, oh my God, I got to buy a van. I've got to buy all this equipment. I got to get insurance. And then it comes time to actually get the truck done. And you're like, oh, well, let me see how I can do that the most economical way. Because they're strapped for cash, like you said, but it's a mistake if it's a mistake to not invest from day one, because it's going to wind up costing you much more in the long run when you have to redo everything.
Yeah. And so again, I wanted to make sure it was an important point to stamp that. Now, I met Dan out at my mentor. I got a few mentors, but Ken Goodrich and Landon Brewer, they're mentors of mine. They drastically helped me change my business, where we thought we were building the business on a very, very firm foundation. When I started working on the business, I saw, working with Ken and Landon about 5 years in, that we had so many things that we thought we were doing right that we weren't quite doing right. So I met Dan out at Gettel's facility, actually out in Las Vegas. And I had no idea. I was just there reviewing my financials, doing some coaching, working on my business here in Florida. And in walks Dan and his, who were you with that day, Dan?
Alyssa Young. She runs our digital marketing.
Yeah. So Dan walks in representing KickCharge, and they had some things to review with the Gettel brand. And I had no idea that Dan was responsible and a big part of the watercolor logo for Gettel that's become so iconic. And that's where I met Dan. And obviously, he got parallel credibility being associated with those guys. And so that's probably one of the more premier brands you've had a hand in. And I mean, Ken took over that business in 2012. And since then they've grown to track more than $100 million in sales a year. And so Dan, tell us about that, because I don't think you were initially going to go with the watercolor logo initially, right?
We talked about the story of the Gettel brand, the story of Ken working for his dad, and the idea of this flashlight that he would hold when he was working on the air conditioning equipment. And we thought that there was a great story to be told with that messaging. So we thought, how can we capture the essence of that kind of old craftsmanship? The Gettel name and the Gettel brand has been synonymous for good service within that community for a long time. Like, they used to manufacture actually heating and air equipment that seemed to last forever. So I thought it would be a good idea to sort of capitalize on that equity and that story. So we started with Ken. I think Ken at that point was $7 million a year in revenue. So what, 5 years later, $100 million. So look at the investment in brand from that perspective. But again, that was the turning point for Ken. That was the inflection point that changed the trajectory of that company. The whole entire brand campaign was based on that image of that boy holding that flashlight. Everything, the radio, the billboards. We just finished the website for them. There's just so many cool things about that story that resonate with people. Yeah, look at
just end at the logo design. Then you take it all the way through what the customer experiences.
Yeah. So, the whole idea of brand, and we could touch on this, like, so everyone's like, well, I already have a logo. So there's a difference between having a logo and having a brand, right? So, the idea of a brand is something that people get a little confused about. Well, what is a brand? So think about a brand in terms of a wheel, right? So if you've got this wheel, in the center of the wheel is a hub. That hub is your logo, right? So that's the thing that is going to create the rest of that wheel. The spokes going out to create that wheel, those are all the touch points. So those are all the things that we want to try to make sure we are coordinating. So they're your vehicles, the uniforms for the guys, the website, your digital marketing, your brand voice. All those things are what encapsulates your brand. So again, Ken's story revolving around the boy with the flashlight. He had radio, he had TV, he had the website. Certainly the trucks are very iconic. All those things are really speaking to that brand story. And that's where guys get a little confused. They're like, well, I already have a logo. I'm like, yeah, you may have a logo, but do you have a brand is really the question. What is your brand story? And how does that story communicate to the people that you're selling to? And how does it connect to them is more importantly, right? How do you connect to the people you're trying to sell to?
Yeah. And so after you got parallel credibility through that. And again, obviously once I looked into you, there's nobody that's got more experience with service companies than you guys. So we've been kind of talking through working together on some of our stuff. And what I think is really interesting is because even on some of your online content and your webinars, I've seen that the hub, right? Follow me here, but the hub is basically the logo, right?
Mm-hmm.
But the first question you ask, which I think is very intuitive and it parallels a lot of our early success through reverse engineering, or Gary Vee says reverse engineering. The first thing that becomes important to you isn't the avatar. It isn't the logo. It isn't the naming. All those become important, but literally your process starts with market disruption. So you're more interested in who the players are in that market, huh? Mm-hmm. Tell us about that.
Yeah. So that's really what we're trying to do, is trying to figure out how do you build a brand that disrupts the space that company is competing in, right? So we look at all their competition. We look at what those guys are doing. And the irony of it, and what I love about that exercise, is they'll put out, 5 or 6 of their top competitors, and we go in and we research them. We look at their brands, we look at their social channels, we look at their brand voice. And I come back and 95% of the time I'm like, really? Seriously? Like, these are the guys you're competing against? And I love to see that, because most of those guys have no idea what they're doing. And they're successful, and that's awesome. But imagine how much more successful they would be if they had a great brand. So I look at it as this awesome opportunity, right? You've got all these big competitors in your space, and none of them have a clue about how to do branding. So what would happen to your business if we killed it for you with your brand? Like, what would happen? How much more business would you get? Or how much better would your marketing work if you had a better brand than these guys? So it's not usually a high bar that they set. When we do the competitive analysis, I'm like, wow, this guy is $15 million with that brand. Wow. And I love it, because that just means that, wow, now we can go into this market and we can disrupt it with something that looks different and looks so much better than these guys. Maybe they're being outgunned in how much they're spending. And it's typically they need to outgun them because they don't have a good brand. Like, if you had a better brand, you would need to spend not nearly as much money on marketing the company.
And I want to touch on that more in the middle of the interview, because I think that it's important for guys to realize that when you have a powerful brand, it doesn't cost you more, right? It actually costs you less. But I think it's what I see really interesting with what you say about the market disruption is when I started. So right about the time that I met you out at Ken's facility, right? I met Ken out in Austin, and he was working with Roy Williams and the Wizard of Ads. And so we spent a few days out there. And what Roy said for the Wizard of Ads, way before they ever consider working with a client, because they're very particular, right? I think you and Roy and that whole thing coming together for Gettles are really pop between the brand messaging and the icons and what is actually said on the radio. Right? I think that's really powerful, and we've already talked a bit about that. But what I think is interesting is Roy says he looks at the market first to determine if there's a king in the market. And so you're always going to spend more money when there's a king in the market. So you want to enter markets where, like you just said, where guys are literally $15 million players, but they don't have a brand, right? And so you it sounds like, based on your guys' terminology and your psychology around it, you kind of pick apart what the brands have so that you can create disruption for the service company.
Yeah. And it's also like a good exercise too, just to look and see, okay, well, there's there's 3 brands in this space and all of them are using red and blue. Well, we're not going to hit the streets with the red and blue. We're going to do something that's totally different because we want to own our own brand colors, So the idea is to stand out, right? What's the point of fitting in? Like, I don't want to look like anyone else that they've seen before. So we try to pick color schemes that are very different. Like, I know Scott's on the webinar, Scott Woodward, but Scott's colors are red and brown. Like, how many HVAC companies do you know that use red and brown? Probably none, right? Yeah. So that's why we did it though, right? I want to pick a brand color scheme that no one in your space is using, so I can own it. So thinking about it from that perspective, again, if there's 3 other companies in your space and they're all using mascot superheroes, well, you know what? We're not going to be doing mascot superheroes in your market. We're going to be doing something that's different, something that's going to stand out. Why would I put a mascot superhero in your market? So even for us, because we do so many brands for people all over the country, we're always cognizant of the people that we've worked with in their space to make sure that I'm not putting something out on the street that's going to, look similar to anything else that we've done for another client out there.
So then what comes next? So you look at the market, right? You determine what the colors being used are, determine what the avatars are, right? And you say, all right, I think we've got an opportunity. Everybody's red and blue. I think we got an opportunity with yellow or orange, right? And so then you go that way. What comes next? The name or the logo?
So, let's assume that they already have a name that we like, and we could talk a little bit about the name, right? So names are something that, either we're given the name and the client isn't interested in changing it, or we'll have a discussion about the name if we think the name doesn't work. There's examples of companies that are named after specific communities or areas that they serve. Well, that may be great if that's the only community that you serve, but what happens if you want to start going into other communities? So, we've seen examples like that where they start trying to go into other communities and the other people in those communities like, oh, we didn't know you came here because your name is Washington Heating and Air. Well, yeah, we service other areas. Well, but your name is Washington Air. So that's part of like trying to figure out is that name something that we want to brand, or is it something that we need to talk about that's holding you back, and really think about the idea of maybe renaming it. Another common problem you see with names are names, either last name brands are very difficult to get as much traction quickly, or the worst names are names after initials. So like JP Heating and Air, horrible, right? Because what does JP Heating and Air mean? I don't know. I have to rely on other things for me to understand or get an idea of what JP Heating and Air is. So the best names are the names that when you say them, they sound like something positive, like air professionals or air experts. Well, they're the experts. Right away, I've established in my head, I close my eyes, I say air experts, and I already think something positive about that company. So part of what we want to try to do is make sure that that name already instills something, an image, a visual, or a positive brand expectation. So last name brands are tougher because unless you've been in that community for years and years and years, they don't know what your last name signifies. So that becomes a little bit tough to really try to gain traction with. So when we have the opportunity, if it makes sense, then that's something we'll have a discussion about. So let's assume we have the name. The next part is to really try to figure out, okay, well, what is the overall brand strategy? What is the brand voice going to be? What is this brand going to sound like? If you were talking to this brand, at a party, how would it talk back to you? How would it respond to you? Is it fun? Is it very, very serious? What are the aspects of that brand that we think will connect with the people you're trying to sell to? So that's the other part of it, is who are your demographics? Who are the people that we're ultimately really trying to attract? A commercial market has a very different person that they're selling to than a consumer market, right? You're dealing with a facility manager if you're a commercial HVAC contractor, so your brand needs to speak to that person. But if you're doing B2C, you're dealing with a homeowner. Typically, you're dealing with a woman who's making the first line of inquiry. So how do you design a brand that attracts that demographic is really the other parts of the question. So, figuring those things out goes from there.
You're reminding me of so when I was in Ghetto's conference room with you, and you said we were talking hypothetical about air conditioning companies. And I think, right, and something I want to touch on around the name is most contractors' ego. So I want to talk about you kind of talking through the ego about the name in a second. But you said to me an important question that really opened up my eyes. And I think that all businesses should know the answer to this. But you asked me, we're sitting in the conference, you said, what is your brand by definition? And I don't mean Bruno's brand or any of the other companies we're affiliated with. You were asking me, what is your brand by definition? And I think that as the business owner, you go into, because you're not, gun ready with this answer. I think the answer you go into is all of the features and benefits that you talk about your brand having in your market. But if you boil it down, I really like your answer. You said, no, look, everybody's going to elevator pitch their brand, right? The brand is what people say about you when you're not in the room, right?
Yep, exactly. Yeah. It's what people say about you at a party, or they're talking to their friends and they're going to say, hey, I need a heating and air guy. Oh, you got to call Bruno. So what would they say? How would they say your company was? The guy who showed up, what was he like? So trying to really capture their mind and make it so that these people become your biggest cheerleaders, right? Listen, we could brand anyone to look any way we want, but when you ring that doorbell, it's on you guys to figure out the rest, right? It's on you guys to deliver on what that brand says you should be delivering on. So, we love working with companies that are delivering an amazing service. They just don't look like they're delivering an amazing service. Because I know when I marry those two things up, they're going to kill it, because they're actually delivering on what the brand will signify.
Yeah, and I think that going back to the name thing, so when you work with a guy that says JP, the initials you said is really difficult, JP Heating and Air, what is the ego type conversation like? How does that traditionally go? Because you've done thousands now overall between different companies. When their initials associated to a brand, what is that conversation like?
It's trying to have them understand that, first of all, because they've used it for so long is not necessarily a rational reason as to why they should continue to use it. Okay, so that's a frank conversation. So they may be coming to us for something else, and we're telling them, hey, you might want to rethink this, because it's going to be very difficult for people to gain brand recognition with an initial base brand. I'll give you a perfect example. I just came home from a bike ride. The guys are cutting my grass. I don't know the name of their company, but it's a 5-foot logo on an 18-foot trailer, and it's like ACR, AFB. They've been cutting my grass for 5 years. I swear to God, I cannot remember their name, because if it was like Pro Cut or like, something about grass or something, like I'd remember it. But initial base brands are just so hard to gain traction, because you close your mind and you close your eyes and you say JP Heating and Air. What's the first visual that comes to your mind? Like, there is no visual that comes to your mind. So when you have a brand that as soon as you close your eyes and you say the name and a visual pops up in your head, well, that's something you want to try to capitalize, right? Because you can connect those things. And every time they see that avatar or that mascot or that symbol, they'll think about that name.
Yeah, and I think that even ties to the last name stuff, right? Why do you think? Because again, when I was designing my business plan in 2012, everybody said don't use your last name. But for me, I'm Italian American. I grew up in a very significance-driven family. When I was deciding my name on brand, I'm like Pro Cooling, right? Or All Temp Air, or Any Day Air, Anytime Air, or Same Day Air. So many names come to mind where you're like, I want my name to represent what we stand for. But for me, right, with us and the way I was raised, because as humans, look, we break this down into the simple consumer psychology. Consumer psychology parallels back to how people were raised and how they were born. For me, I was going to name the company after me, because I knew that I can drive up what I stand for, and then that's what the company would stand for. And so for me, because that was more personality driven, I wouldn't have been able to represent a Pro Cooling per se, right? But my last name, I know we can ramp that up and guarantee the service. And so what's that conversation like when guys have their last name as a company? Do you look at their personality to see, will it show through the brand, marrying service to brand, or do you just purely start the market disruption and say, how do we gain the fastest traction for the fastest growth?
So, listen, last name brands, they absolutely can work, right? But, the reality is as a startup, it's different. Like if you were starting a business, there's no way we would recommend you name it after your last name, regardless of your personality. We would say, because first of all, your budget's going to be limited, and I need your marketing to work harder. I need your marketing to say something about your brand right away, instead of waiting years for it to gain traction within your community. So listen, if they're established and they've been running that last name brand, some of our most successful brands are last name brands, and that can work totally fine. But if they had started with a better name, I think they might have gotten to where they need to go faster. That's all. So
I like the way you put that, because it makes sense, because I did have to hit the streets pretty damn hard for people. I mean, in the first month, the first 30 days, I knocked personally on 1,100 doors, right? But because I wanted to stand so much for what our brand wanted to stand for, me as a person, I put that energy in. But to your point, the reason you wouldn't start with a last name initial type brand first is because with a brand that disrupts the market or that gains the customer's attention faster, it just happens smoother and you have to spend less dollars or energy doing it, right?
Yeah. And it also depends too on what the overall strategy is too. So if you're trying to look more like a national brand, well, national brands typically are not going to be branded with a last name. They're going to be branded as a phrase or something. So the idea with names that signify a positive brand promise is that they already say something about the brand in the absence of any other context. So if they are at a party and they say, hey, you know what, call it Good Guy Plumbing. Well, do you think Good Guy Plumbing sounds like a guy that's going to come to your house and rip you off? No, like they wouldn't be called Good Guy Plumbing. So let's control that impression with a positive name as much as we can. If we have a last name brand, you've been in the community for 15 years, 5 years, everybody knows you, or you're well known throughout your community, fine. Then let's leverage that equity. That's totally fine. But I'm saying as a startup, I would say don't do it. That's all.
Yeah. And to your point, it just costs more energy and dollars.
Yeah.
All right, so when you look at the market disruption, right? And then it sounds like you do a name analysis, right? Is this good enough? Will it work? What will stand through more? And so then after you settle on the name analysis, what comes next? The logo?
Yeah. Yeah. Then we start the sketch process of really trying to figure out what this logo is going to look like, and how it's going to be integrated into their other marketing channels. So the most critical aspect, obviously, of brand integration is how it lives on the vehicle. So most of the times we're designing logos and vehicles concurrently so that I can make sure that what we're designing is going to function well on that canvas. So that's where you see guys really get it wrong, right? They either design something that maybe looks awesome on a business card or maybe looks okay on the top of a website, but you go blow it up and try to integrate it onto a vehicle, and the thing completely falls apart, whether you can't read it from a distance, whether it's just too confusing to understand what the message of the visual is. You gotta remember the outdoor medium, when you're talking about vehicle wraps, there's so much philosophy about that that's rooted in the outdoor advertising world, because it has the same parameters. You think about the billboards that you drive by, and the most effective billboards have probably the least amount of words on them. So when you see guys that are doing truck wraps that have, commercial, residential, and, free estimates and Facebook logos and QR codes. I mean, QR codes, when was the last time you saw someone go up to a van with a phone and use a QR code? Or who cares if you were on Facebook? Like, you're really not going to be on Facebook, that I need to put a Facebook logo on there? Or they use 2 phone numbers. Like, we're at the point now where we're almost not even putting phone numbers on truck wraps, because again, when was the last time you as a consumer actually dialed the phone? Like, do you dial the phone anymore? Or do you tell Siri to dial the phone?
What gets really annoying is we use Service Side, right? And we've got 100 vehicles with these big yellow billboards, and we put a lot of energy and millions of dollars into the Bruno name, right? But when our customer service representatives have the campaign source come through as Bruno Air Van Wrap Truck, right? The phone number, there is no way, to your point, that they dialed the phone number off the vehicle wrap. Right? Like, they just saw the vehicle wrap, right? To your point, I stopped putting my phone number on billboards 3 years ago.
Yeah. Well, let's look at Gettle, right? 7 million to 100 million, no phone number on the truck. Yeah.
No phone number on the truck. I never noticed that.
Nope. Just website address.
And I spent a lot of time there. I never noticed no phone number on the truck.
Yeah. So listen, the idea is, thinking about distilling that logo on that canvas and how it's going to function, how it's going to disrupt the space, what's going to be different about this van that you haven't seen 1,000 times before. How can I own that particular color scheme? How can I own that image, that look, whether it's clean and modern or more nostalgic or whatever the case is. So yeah, that's really the route that we take. And then you try to figure out, again, is this the right strategy? How is this strategy then going to communicate on the rest of the channels? Because it's more than just doing the logo. It's how does that logo then live and breathe in the rest of that brand wheel, right? We got the wheel, right? So how is it going to speak in your email marketing? How is it going to sound on your website? You know, that's the most important thing that people forget about too, is the messaging around your brand needs to all be connected. It's like, it drives me crazy when I see guys investing in branding and then doing generic websites with generic copy. Like, seriously, what are we doing here? If we're trying to build a brand voice, shouldn't the voice and the words on your website speak to what makes you unique as a company? Or should it be just you throw your logo on the top of the website and call it a day? Because the consumer is smart. Like, if they hit your site and hit 5 others and they all sound the same, well, how are we going to win that consumer over then? What's going to make them think we're any different? So thinking about it more holistically, like, how is this brand going to talk? What's the tagline going to look like? You know, so we do a lot of tagline development. We usually do the tagline after we create the brand, because I don't know yet specifically what the visuals are going to dictate, but the visuals often reflect back into the tagline. So that's another piece of it too. You know, I like to do taglines when we can, because I think it really helps frame that voice of that brand.
Yeah, and it probably leaves a lasting impression, right?
Yeah.
Is there a common color scheme? I know that you started the market disruption. I think that's absolutely more important. If everybody's blue in your market, then be orange type of mindset, right? But is there a common color scheme that you see consumers do prefer?
Not specifically. You know, I know there's a lot of consumer psychology with different colors and what they signify. For us, it's more about the idea of when that van is driving through a community or driving through a neighborhood, what is likely to cause that consumer to stop and maybe take notice? So again, just try to think of atypical color schemes, whether it's orange and, you know, teal. Like, orange and teal is pretty unique, right? There's not a lot of companies that use orange and teal, or apple green and yellow, or anything along those lines. But we usually try to think of brand colors in terms of 2 specific colors, and 2 specific colors that haven't been typically deployed before, or that are very common within that community. Of course, we've done brands that are red, white, and blue, or red and blue. You know, we've done dozens of them, and that's fine. But given the choice, I would rather do a brand color scheme that I know that they can specifically own. When we do our competitive analysis, it's very interesting to see how many similar brand colors are in a specific market. So I really like that as well. Like, if there's 3 companies that are all using red and blue, that's awesome for us, because then we know we can do something that's totally different.
Major win, right? Yeah. What about avatars and mascots? How do they dial into the logo design?
So a lot of times mascots can be used just to really try to connect the name with the visual. So sometimes you'll have a mascot that has something to do with the name. Like, for example, we did a brand for a company called Texas Air. And Texas Air has what looks like a sheriff, right? And we developed a whole brand story around the idea of that sheriff. So, you know, I love to do mascots when it's appropriate. It's not always appropriate. It's not always the right solution, but it really depends on the name. So if you have a name that instinctively calls up a specific image, then you want to try to connect that. Like, rocket drains sounds like something that should have something with a rocket, right? It would be weird not to have a mascot with a rocket, right? So when they have, you know, a name like Cool Tex, like we did this awesome brand for Stephanie at Cool Tex, and it uses a penguin with a wrench, you know, and the penguin's got sunglasses on. Now I've connected the dots of that, right? I've made it so that they make sense and it's put together better. So, you know, I think mascots have their place. It's not always the right answer, but it just really depends on that market.
So it sounds like the main focus is, can you synonymously own that image to sound, visual, and meaning somebody, right?
Yeah.
And so what comes after the logo then? So you decided on the market disruption, you decided on the name, decided on the logo. What's next?
So then, you know, integration. So the first typical integration for us is design the vehicles, right? Make sure that the vehicles are going to do what they're supposed to do, which is disrupt, right? Vehicle advertising, most guys know the most effective advertising dollar for dollar. There isn't anything out there that can compare with the number of impressions that a good truck wrap will give you. The problem is most of the truck wraps that guys get, they're awful and they don't work. So guys get a little hung up on the fact, well, my truck's really not generating a lot of business, or my truck's not really working. Well, part of the problem generally is that the truck's not properly designed. So a properly designed truck wrap is certainly going to be the most effective advertising. The next thing you got to look at is then integration. So you've got the uniforms. We like to design the uniforms for the guys, make sure that they're all coordinated. So the brand colors are integrated on the uniforms. other stuff like the business cards, the email marketing. When we do the website, it's more about, again, the website reflecting the brand and then the brand voice. Now the website has to speak to that consumer. When we do the maintenance agreement brochures, it's the same thing, right? So if I'm a consumer and I'm trying to sign up for a maintenance agreement plan, I want to make sure that I feel like that maintenance agreement plan has some value. So making sure that those materials, again, deliver that brand promise in a meaningful way. It's really hard to sell maintenance agreement plans without having something that people feel is of value to signing up for it in the first place, right? So all those things now, all those touch points, coordinating all of them, making sure they all speak to that same messaging is really how you win it.
And so what would you say comes after maintenance agreement plans? Like at what point does the website integration mix in, or the business cards, or the email signatures?
I mean, certainly the business cards and the uniforms, and the truck, if they start hitting the street with that. Sometimes the website happens a little bit later, but at a minimum, you want to make sure that you don't have a brand out on the street that doesn't match what's on the website, because then the consumer's all confused. Is that the same company? Is that the same van I just saw driving by? So even if it's just putting your logo as a placeholder on your current website, that's fine. But ideally, you want to try to roll out the website as close to the time as the brand launches. We have several opportunities where we do it all simultaneously. Like we just did a brand for Jason Bueller he's in Florida, and that brand rollout happened literally over the weekend. Six brand new vans. His email marketing went out. His letters to the customers went out. And the website launched literally over the weekend. So he started on a Friday, and we rebranded him and also changed the name of the company. So that on Friday, he was one name, and by Monday, he was completely ready to go. And
that's a lot of coordination, huh?
Yeah.
And so what about like public relations? So to that scenario, do you get facilitated in any of the public relations about a new brand? So it sounds like email marketing, customer letters. Does it go beyond that?
Part of the SEO strategy would typically deploy some press releases and let the people know within those communities that there is a name change going. It doesn't always get picked up by the media. Sometimes the rebrand isn't really terribly exciting for them, but there is obviously some SEO purpose to doing some of those things. But yeah, I mean, depends on the size of the company when we rebrand. Like we just rebranded Gem Heating and Air in New England. I think they're a $30 or $50 million company. And their rebrand got picked up by a lot of trade magazines and some local press. So I think it sometimes depends on the size of the company as to whether or not the editors may deem that to be newsworthy.
What kind of team members? So we talked a lot about how you deliver the ideology and the theory to the HVAC contractor, helping them marry service and the consumer's mind version of the brand. What about KickCharge? What kind of team members do you need to actually fulfill your brand promise to the contractors?
So, I mean, we have a team here of, I feel like the team we have is specialized in all the areas that we need to be to deliver that kind of service. So we have content writers that write all these beautiful websites, beautiful brochures. They bring that brand voice to life. You want a great website to read Texas Air's website, texasairinc.com, and read the words on that website. And you tell me how you feel as a consumer after you read the words on that website. That's what I'm talking about bringing the brand voice to life. When it comes to the digital marketing side, I have a team that runs the digital marketing side. And then the account people obviously manage all the projects. And then I have 4 full-time designers, including myself, that do that. And I have an illustrator also that works for us that helps also create some of these beautiful mascots and things like that. So,
how about brand as unique opportunity? Like, where do you really go from there? So when you think about branding, how does that deliver a unique opportunity to the contractors and consumer?
So yeah, a unique opportunity in the sense that, again, most of the people that they're competing against aren't getting it right. So if they're not getting it right, how can we capitalize on their weakness in the marketplace? How do we make sure that our brand does so much more work than their brand just by the sake of being visually attractive and delivering a positive brand promise? It's the same idea about, having, a beautiful website with generic content. Like, why would you do that? So trying to think about it in terms of making sure that those opportunities are taken advantage of. So we talk about the idea of trying to own the keywords, right? So everyone wants to be number one for heating repair in Tampa, Florida, right? Or air conditioning repair, Tampa, Florida. What about if we own that keyword in people's minds before they went to Google? Wouldn't that be a smarter use of your budget to try to make sure we can get our name in the minds of the people instead of having them go on Google and then look at the first top 5 listings? So that's what we talk about when the marketing works smarter and works better and more efficiently, because it's in their head already. So I want to try to control what they're thinking about before they even are ready to make that call. It's much more efficient to do it that way, right? Than to spend all this money on SEO and pay-per-click. I mean, you got to do it. I get it. But I'd much rather have them know instinctively, if I have a problem, yeah, I'm going to call those guys. I see their trucks all over. I see them in my communities. I heard great things about them. They look like a company that knows what they're doing. All of those things are the things that we're trying to really instill in that consumer's mind.
You know, what's funny about that is, so back in 2015, I went to a Red Sox spring training game, right? We're Fort Myers, Florida, Southwest Florida. The Red Sox have their spring training facilities here. And I got invited to the game by the editor for one of the local newspapers. And so I'm sitting with him, and he's very focused on digital advertising, a younger guy focused on Google and SEO and attention, really. He's the editor. And so he's focused. He's not the editor, he's the publisher. He has an editor. And so he's focused on how does the newspaper get more attention? And he kind of runs the whole thing. And he says to me at the baseball game, he says, you know, what you got to do, very similar to what you just said. So that is a freaking huge knowledge bomb to anybody watching. You better write this down. Hopefully you have your notepad ready. Take your Apple iPhone, make a note. You want to own the consumer's mind before they actually go to the search. So he says to me back in 2015, you know, why pay $50 a search term for AC repair in Naples, Florida, when you have the ability to own the search term? And so back in 2015, what I started thinking about was, okay, so our radio ads, how do we do a sign off to say we own that, right? And so our marketing was always very educational. We were not offer based. We were high touch, high value. Some of the stuff we talk about in the group, 99hvcgroup.com, is that there's only one successful way to be a contractor. It's high value, high touch, high price, because you got to drive the gross margin dollars. And so our marketing has always not been offer based. It's always been very educational based, clearing drain lines, changing filters, air quality, etc. And so on all of our radio stuff starting in 2015, what we started doing as the sign off was, whenever you're thinking about clearing your drain line or your drain line backing up, don't think Bruno Total Home, just think Bruno, right? So we started signing off on just think Bruno. Mm-hmm. That became a huge tagline to all of our ending of the marketing, whether it be TV, radio, Facebook, just think Bruno, because what that ended up associating, you know what our number one, because Google doesn't give you real clear answers on what the SEO search terms are, right? But on the PPC side, the pay-per-click, you get search term results.
Right.
You know what our number one search term result was? Just think Bruno, right? And so our Google search terms went from, like, when we started that campaign in like 30 days, went from like 3,000 search terms for a Bruno related term to literally 30 days later, 7,000. 30 days after that, 10,000. 30 days after that, 12,000. So in a literal 120-day period, we went from Bruno search terms just being standard 3,300 search terms a month to over 12,000, because on all of our marketing, we signed off, when thinking about the cooling of your home, don't think Bruno Air, Bruno Total Home, just think Bruno, right? And so to your point, how do you own the consumer's mind before the search term? And that probably ties to your point about how an effective brand and unique opportunity costs you less in marketing, right?
Right. Yeah. Yeah. So it reminds me of the brand that we just finished for Bueller Air in Florida. And his tagline is "Stay cooler with Bueller." And he's got radio spots running with "Stay cooler with Bueller." So again, trying to win them right at that point and have them think, well, anytime I need to have something done with my air conditioning, stay cooler with Bueller. You know, so totally, yeah. Think Bruno, it's awesome. Like, I love that. That was awesome.
Well, with the Bueller thing, right? Stay cooler with Bueller. How do you? The graphic that we made for today's live cast was winning customers' minds from the streets, and I think that's the number one bullet point that you and I had talked about. And to the contractor, that probably doesn't. They can probably infer what that means, but it probably doesn't make a lot of definition sense. So what does winning the consumer's mind at the streets mean? And you said it that way, so it must mean something special.
Well, I mean, Bueller, just as an example, is a company. They used to be called Air Source America, and they were called Air Source America for 10 years. And people didn't know what they did. They were like, they thought maybe it was an oxygen company or an oxygen supply company. It just doesn't really speak very specifically to heating and air. And they had generic white vans with lettering on it. So we came up with a new brand for them. I think I could show it to you if I.
Yeah, I'd love to see it.
Yeah. And you could see, let me see if I can do the share here. Yeah. So this is the new brand.
Yeah. Run through some of those.
You know, so that's one where now all of a sudden he rolls out 6 of these vans within his communities in Jacksonville. And now everyone,
awesome.
you know, he walks into a store with his embroidered shirts and they're like, oh my God, I see your vans all over. And here's a guy that's been in the community for 10 years, had 4 or 5 trucks on there, used to go in there with the same embroidered shirt that said Air Source America, and no one really knew who he was. So again, now he's winning it in the streets because he's walking into stores, you know, and everybody already knows who he is. He's only had this brand out for 3 months.
You know what's awesome is that literally looks, that little avatarish face, avatar face, literally looks like Stay Cooler. Like he looks like the avatar is designed to be like quote unquote cool.
Yeah. And let's look at the color scheme here, right? So look at the colors, like dark blue, orange, and a teal color. Like, well, who's got those colors? Nobody. That's why we took them. So all these vans rolling around. And if I show you the before on it, like you could see why.
Dude, that brand is awesome.
You know, you could see why, like it just blended, right? That's the before. And then there's the after, right? So which one are you going to remember rolling down the street? And which one speaks to that consumer? Which one feels like a company you would love to have in your house? Like Air Source America. Yeah, I mean, I guess they could come to my house, but like Stay Cool with Bueller, yeah, they should be pretty cool in my house. Like that'd be fun. Like, so we're doing stuff where he's gonna be actually giving out sunglasses as part of, you know, what he leaves behind. Like Ken leaves behind the flashlight for the customers. So, you know, stuff like that. Definitely, you know, there's just so many of these guys where like the before, you know, are just.
I need that website widget. What website widget is that? Holy shit! Before and after for air conditioners.
It's pretty cool. It's like, so here's another one. You know, Seatown Electric. You know, the brand was you know, it was fine. Like it was okay. Like I would say this is a neutral brand. But which one would you remember driving down the road? You know, this one or this one? Which one blends? Which one stands out? Which one disrupts? So, you know, these are. I mean, there's a ton of these examples here that you guys can see, but. You know, that's the whole idea behind it.
Come on, show me that air duct cleaning one. That is got to be insane. I've actually seen this Ray the plumber guy, by the way, so I'd like to see that one too.
So yeah, air duct cleaning X, and it's supposed to be Clean Extreme, and then here's the new one, Clean Extreme. So his idea also, competing against some franchises in that market, wanted to appear like a larger company, wanted to appear like a larger entity. This looks like a franchise, right? It doesn't look like it's a 2-van operation. It looks like it's a national entity. You know, there's a lot of these. Like this one also, the avatar is based on the owner, who's got a handlebar mustache that looks just like that.
Very iconic, yeah.
Which one would you remember here? This one or this one? You know, again, unique colors: red, tan, and teal. Like those are colors that you don't typically see together. You
did a Facebook story about. Scroll up. You did a Facebook story about the Burek. Right? Is that Burek?
Yeah, that's right. Yep.
You did a Facebook story about that. Dude, that guy looks exactly like that logo.
Yeah.
Holy shit. Same color shirt. Yeah. Insane, iconic mustache. Like, that's got to be powerful. That's Maryland there? Or what is that? That's got to be powerful.
Yeah. And this is another example, though, of the problems that you often see with truck wraps, right? The idea of this company's name called Safari Plumbing, like it's an interesting name. It draws a lot of visuals. But when I look at this van, I'm thinking that maybe they do safaris in Africa. Like, I don't know what they do. Like, it's so really, like, I don't get it, right? So the rebrand frames it. Now you've got this cool avatar, right? And he looks like a friendly guy. He's going to come to the house, and, you know, the kids will remember this. Like, so again, trying to fix what was not working here, and get it into something that will certainly generate a lot of eyeballs on it. You know, that's another good one.
That elephant is awesome, man.
You know, Kennedy's is a pretty good one. You know, Kennedy's was okay. you know, again, just not quite as dramatic or not quite as eye-catching as the new one. You know, this guy looks like he's going to come to your house. He's going to totally do the right thing. He's going to totally fix your problem. And the lettering is legible. Everything is clear. You know, so that, you know, a lot of these are kind of similar in nature.
What I like about the Kennedy's one, I want to look at the gem one in a sec. You should go back to the Kennedy's one. What I like about that is because like you said, the contractors, look, we're just generally small guys. We start out as, we're very ego driven. That's why we started our own business. I like that you didn't get away from the salute. Right? You don't just ditch what works, right?
Yeah.
And so I like how you brought it more to the forefront.
Yeah. 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 So that's one there. And then gem just is another example of just overload. Way too many things happening, you know, a lot of phone numbers, a lot of, you know, go green, energy lean, on site, on time, on money, residential, 24 hours,
$50 million business, huh?
They are, I think, 30 or 50, or they're pretty large. One of the largest in New England. So, you know, their idea was they wanted to basically disrupt with their vehicles. They've got 50 vans running around, and and what was strange about this particular rebrand was the idea that the idea of a gem or a gemstone had never been embraced. So for us, we thought, well, why wouldn't we want to embrace the idea of gem? And the three different colors represent the plumbing, heating, and cooling divisions. Like plumbing, HVAC, and electric is really what's represented by those three different color schemes there. You know, there's you know, I mean, we could go through a lot of these, but you know,
I want the code for this website widget. This is freaking awesome.
I'll hook you up. Here's another one too that I'll just show you real quick, and then we could move on to something else. But you know, this is a company out in Minnesota. They're the oldest plumbing company west of the Mississippi, and they've been in business since 1883. And this was their previous brand. And what I said to them is why are we not embracing the heritage of this company? Because your current truck wraps don't embrace that heritage. They look like you could have just started last week. Like there's nothing about this that talks about that heritage, right? So our idea was to go with something that really kind of brings that heritage and talks about that heritage. So Minnesota's original.
Dude, that looks freaking awesome, man. That's like straight off the Mayflower. That, you know, freaking cool.
Look at that tagline. Look at what that tagline says. Minnesota's original since 1883. No one else can make that claim. So we embraced it. Instead of running away from it, we embraced it. You know, and again, look at the colors, orange and brown. Well, who's got orange and brown for HVAC? Nobody does. That's why I wanted it. That's why I wanted to own that space. You know, there's a lot that are like this. Like there's a bunch here. We don't have.
This is your passion. I'm not rushing you off this. I enjoy this just as much as you do. Show me some more. I mean, look, you've won. It says you've won 20 plus awards on HVACR magazine.
Yeah, we just won the last 3. They'll be announced next week. We won 3 more next week, which is cool.
Really?
So nice. You know, again, really trying to distill this into something much more simplified. Nice is a great name because already I think something about them when they're going to show up, right? They got to be nice. That's their name. So trying to make sure that it made it feel warm, made it feel friendly. Like what they had before, it's not that it was awful, but it didn't capitalize on the idea of being nice. There wasn't anything about this brand that said nice or warm or friendly, but the new one certainly does, right? And it's colors that we can own. It's a whole very cool color scheme. And they look large, right? That doesn't look like a smaller company. No, this is another good one. I really like this one, Cardinal. And that was the previous brand. They're based out of Seattle. Like you could see.
What I love seeing are the ones where it was just like a white truck with just some random lettering. Yeah. And I'm like, let's show some. Yeah, that's awesome. Like,
yeah, I see that Ryan's on here. You know, we had a great time working on Ryan's brand, and that was the before. You know, so it wasn't that it was bad. It was just neutral, right? It didn't exhibit the same emotional connection that something like this does. You know, and look at the colors.
What you say. What I like about what you say is that it wasn't specific, not just hair, like in that specific image. What you say is what we look at the brand is that it wasn't bad. It just didn't say X, Y, or Z, right? So here, I mean, these are saying 2 totally different things.
Yeah. Yeah. And a lot of stuff you see is more neutral. Like this one, I really like because, you know, it said it was legible, like you could read it, but like which one feels more premium?
Wow.
You know, this one or this one? That one feels like they're going to show up and really take care of my home the right way.
That logo looks like when, you know, have you ever seen that show where in Vegas they do the like they do the antique refining, right? That looks antique refined, and where they take the old Coke machines, be faded.
Yeah. I know that guy. Yeah.
Dude, that's
So-
freaking awesome. Holy shit.
So again, colors that are somewhat atypical: red and dark gray and an ivory color. You know, not colors that you see like really all the time, but you know, very big. We wanted to just try to capitalize on this script. So we talk about, like you said, how do you leverage existing brand equity? So for me, some of the brand equity was this script, okay? But the script, the way it was executed here, was not done well. And then again, you see what we did too is we eliminated the WJ, right?
Yeah.
Got rid of the WJ because it adds no value to it. You might as well just go with the last name. Otherwise, it becomes too confusing.
Sure. Yeah. Takes attention away.
You know, here's another cool one too. Like these guys are going to come to the house and they're going to do it just right. Right. So brand promise is already inherent in here. It already says to me, they're going to come to my house and do the right thing. Now you look over here and that's what it was. You know, a lot of things that we don't like to see, right? Too many things happening. You know, it was a little bit busy.
I mean, not bad though. Pretty common to probably what contractors put, right? I mean,
oh, absolutely.
Like this is junk. You would expect that if you see that, you wouldn't say, "Oh, what a shitty design." You would say, "Oh, that's what I would expect a contractor to look like." But it doesn't really stand out past that.
And this has got a couple of typical problems like the Nate logo and the Angie's logo and this Gephardt approved, which I don't even know what that is. You know, I don't want to see our brands competing with any other brand. So we typically don't like to see any other logos on our truck wraps. So, you know, there's a couple more on here. This is something too that's very typical where you see, you know, just a lot of things where there's just way too many things happening on this particular logo. And then that's the before, you know, cool, cozy, comfy, you know, versus this, which is really indicative of a lot of what you see as problematic is this one, you can't read it, right? You can't read that name from a distance. So guys forget about how important it is to view that lettering from a distance. One of the things I would tell everyone in the group, because it's pretty interesting. So like if you're scrolling through your phone in the morning and you see a guy on the HVAC site in Facebook and he posts up his truck wrap and he wants everyone to comment on his truck wrap. Well, before you click to make that image bigger, look at the thumbnail and tell me if you can read the most important things on that truck. If you can't read it in the thumbnail, then how are you going to read it driving down the street at 50 miles an hour? So you always know right away just by looking at a thumbnail whether or not that logo is even going to work.
So how did you get from painting signs in New York City like to this? I mean, this is freaking insane, man. Like this is the biggest brand transformations, especially what you're showing, that I can even imagine. If you're able to do that literally thousands of times, how did you get from painting the signs to that?
I don't know, man. I've been obsessed. I mean, you mentioned the book. This is my book. If people want to buy my book, it's on Amazon. Please buy it. I make like $1.50 on each one. So it's awesome. So, you know, listen, I've been obsessed with brands. I've been obsessed with the idea of how brands work in different mediums, and certainly vehicles. You can't appreciate how a vehicle or truck wrap needs to work unless you've physically been on the side of a van and lettered one. And that's the part where most people just don't get it. Even sign companies, you would think that they would know the limitations of the medium, but the people that I studied with, the people that I worked under, great billboard painters, and I studied that medium so that I would understand how brands need to function in an outdoor environment. And I think that's what really makes us very different in that space. You can't replicate really that experience, and sitting behind a computer designing stuff and not experiencing it in the real world is why I think so many of them fail. And for me, listen, it's really sad to see so many of these truck wraps on the road that are done poorly. You know, it's just sad. Some owner is counting on that for his family. And for us, like, it's so important to make sure that we are delivering a brand that's going to help propel that client. You know, that responsibility that we have is so huge. You know, we tell everyone, and that's part of our core values here, is do the right thing and always have our clients back, because that's their money that you're using to create a brand. Their family's depending on it. Dude, look at how many jobs were created for Ken. Not going to say because of that brand, but that brand played a huge role. So from 7 million,
like 40 employees, like,
yeah.
and he's got 500 now.
So, I mean, listen, it's so critical. So when I see the stuff out on the road that's not functioning properly for that business, it honestly, it just makes me sad because I'm like, well, that business may not get the opportunity to grow or get the opportunity to flourish, because they don't have the right tools. So I never like to see it because it's a lot of money wasted and it's just missed opportunities, So listen, if I understand not everyone can hire us, just make sure you understand the medium, make sure you understand what you're asking them to do and get the right people on your team doing it because it's too important to, not get it right.
How do people, so obviously you've got an amazing impact on people's businesses, but other than the trade shows or other than any random referral, how do people find you? Like you said, like if I were you, I'm picturing you with exactly what you just said, seeing that a better brand would impact family growth and job growth, et cetera. How do people like find you? Like if I were you, I would literally knock on the van with the shitty wrap or the letters window and be like, dude, I need to talk to your owner now. Like that sounds like it's your passion. Like you want to create job growth and family growth, and et cetera. And I mean, that's awesome because that shows through the care and the love that you have for people. But literally, I would knock on their windows and say, dude, your owner needs to call me now because even if it's $15,000, it is over, like you said earlier, over a 10-year period, what does $15,000 cost per year, right? How many more sales? And one of the things I want to talk about next is how much of an impact do people have after you work with them? But if I were you, I would knock on all their windows and doors and literally call them and show up at their office. And it's a no-brainer based on what you've shown. So like, how do people find you? Is it just purely referral or the trade shows or?
Yeah, I mean, certainly the trade shows. I mean, if you Google like best truck wraps, we show up all over the place. And certainly we've written a number of articles in different trade magazines. We win a lot of awards. I think we're pretty well known in that space. And I think what makes us a little bit different is that we're not yes people. So people come to us and they want us to do work for them. And sometimes it's just not in their best interest to have us do what they're asking us to do. And if that's the case, I'm not afraid to say no. We want you to design us a website. Okay, cool. Well, let me see what your brand looks like. Yeah, okay. I don't think I can do what you're asking me to do with this brand because you're asking me to build something that's going to deliver an ROI and you're compromising your own efforts because your branding doesn't work. So I'm the guy that's going to say no to a lot of people who like, oh, we love your truck wraps. We want something just like it. And then they send me their logo and I'm like, I'm sorry, I can't do anything with this. It's literally like 5% of the people that contact us.
I can personally voice, we acquired a company on the East Coast and I said to Dan, hey, I want to work with this company. I have this visual of this brand. And he literally said, all right, send me the brand story. We talked about it. And he says, I just don't see it, man. Like, I don't really know how it's connecting in my mind. And I wasn't offended, but I had this owner's mentality of seeing this brand and saying, I see it as being a classic, crisp type brand that homeowners can call for classic type service. And he's like, I just don't see how it connects. And so, yeah, I mean, look, you don't do it in an offensive way, but sometimes, like, how often do people's egos get in the way?
A lot of times they come to us and some of them are ready for the rebrand, like they know it and they're ready to make that change and they're committed to make their change. But for others, again, sometimes it's like, I'm the first guy to tell them this. And I'm like, really? Well, isn't that actually ironic, right? So the digital marketing agency, they don't care what your brand looks like, right? So what's the logic behind that, right? So we're going to drive all this traffic to your website. And then when they get there, the impression is not going to convert. So I'd rather fix the problem first before taking your money to build a website that I know won't work. And I think that that's what makes us a little bit different as well, because I'm not willing to just cash checks. Like I could be cashing checks all the time, but like I got to do the right thing. That's part of what we believe in, and making sure that we're delivering something that's going to add value to your business. And I'm sorry, I'm not going to just take your money. And yeah, maybe I'm the first guy. Maybe the sign company could care less what your logo looks like. They just want to print and, install truck wraps, and that's fine. But like, I'm just not going to do it because I know it's not going to work for you, and I don't want to have you disappointed at the end when you say, well, my truck wrap doesn't look like all the ones you've done. Well, Yeah, it doesn't, because I didn't have the right foundation. And that's why guys investing in truck wraps, doing it without having the right brand and the right logo to put it on there is never going to work. And that's, again, something that people don't understand is how can you build an effective foundation to your marketing plan unless you have the right foundation? You know, how can you get all those things right?
So I'm curious, because I think everybody watching the video so far saw the befores and afters. And again, that website widget's awesome, right?
I'll hook you up with that website widget, by the way.
When you do, that's awesome. And look, I'll share it to the group too. But when you do like WJ Maloney, right? It was one of the last ones you did, so it stands out in my mind. When you drop the WJ and you make it an antique type Coca-Cola logo type, like mural, what do people say? Like, what do the contractors say to you? Like 90 days after, what is the common, now you've done this a hundred and a few thousand times. What do they say? What's the most common responses contractors have for you?
So the name of the owner of that company is a woman. Her name is Kitty, and it was her dad's plumbing company. And when we presented the logos to her, I'm going to say we're good, but this doesn't happen all the time. She cried when we presented it to her. And it was really, that's really why we do this, because you get that kind of reaction from people and it's so genuine and you realize what a difference you're making in their business. And so she's about 4 months into it, actually, just like you're saying. And the things that have changed as far as what's helped her about it, right? So first of all, just within the community now, she's got 3 of those vans wrapped. People know who that company is now. The second thing that's changed is recruitment. Like, we didn't even talk about recruitment, but let's think about brands in terms of recruitment and how having an awful brand is really horrible for trying to hire people, right? Why would I want to work for your company? Like, am I going to be proud to put this logo on my shirt or to wear your logo when I'm out on a ball game with my friends over the weekend? Well, if the logo is awful, like, it says a lot about the company. Like, you walk into Ken's place, dude, like, you've been in Ken's place, right? Yeah, you walk into Ken's place,
say something special,
and you want to work there. I don't care who you are. I wanted to work there.
I want to work there. Right? But, I mean, we can touch on recruitment. I mean, imagine the impact that logo has.
Everyone says that after they rebrand, recruitment becomes so much easier because it looks like a place that's progressive, that understands the value of image, and that appreciates what a positive image will do to the people that are actually working there. So, those are typically the things. Those are just sort of the intangibles to a certain extent. The financials, there's so many examples of what happens. Like, I talked about it being an inflection point, but the financials are what really I love to hear. Like, Bueller is just crushing it. And it's just so awesome to hear. He's like, dude, we are so busy. We are busier than we ever been. I've got so many calls booked. We can't handle the volume. So like, that's what I love to hear. Like, I always say to people when we're done, like, dude, listen, I'm not responsible for what happens after this point. You better be ready for it, because I can't control like that. You don't have enough guys. You don't have enough bands.
You can't run the service calls. Don't blame the 1-star reviews on me.
Yeah. So I'm just like, listen, you better be prepared for what's going to happen after this takes place. And Jason was a great client to work with, and we text and chat all the time, and I just love hearing those stories. That's what it's all about, right? How many jobs is he going to be able to create now? How many more vacations can he take with his family? All those things factor into the financial results. And, I think you saw the other webinar where we talked about some of the specific financials, but it's always an inflection point.
So I want to ask you, right? This is the toughest question in today's show.
Uh-oh.
In 25 years almost, how many people have ended up unhappy? And I don't want you to answer it in a way that's brandish, literally. How many people after you've done it, and although they might have disagreed through the process because you're the pro, right? How many people at the end of the day, 90 days later, have called you and said, I want my money back. I want to de-wrap it. I want my old brand back?
Zero. Never.
So it's never happened. And this is a crazy claim to make, because everybody watching is air conditioning, plumbing, electrical contractors. Mm-hmm. There's been, I don't know, 5
There's been people, let's go back though, but there's been people that never finished the project. Okay. Really? Yeah. There's been people that, like, at the end they just didn't like the creative or didn't agree with the direction we were going.
They never went to the final result. Yeah.
Absolutely. I'd say that's more like 1 out of 100, 1 out of 50.
And those are probably people that can't get out of their own way anyways. Like they don't like it.
Sometimes, yeah. Sometimes creatively, you just don't agree on direction. And after they go through the process, they're just like, you know what, I'm sticking with what I have, or I'm going somewhere else. Very rarely does that happen. And part of what we try to do to prevent that from happening is make sure we're all aligned before we start. Make sure we all know what the direction is. You know, if we start the process and everyone's on board with doing clean and modern, and then you decide halfway through that, you know what, I really want to do retro and nostalgic, well, that's a very different direction to take. So, you know, we try to really make sure that we are clear from the beginning about what the direction is. Everybody's on board. Everybody knows. And the way we do that too is we leverage our portfolio. Like I can put 200 HVAC brands in front of you and say, which are the top 5 that you like? And you may gravitate towards a certain style. As long as that style is in line with the people we're selling to, then we kind of have it, you know, we're kind of in agreement on that. Unless I feel really strongly and your competitive analysis suggests that we should do something different, then we're pretty much on the same page at that point.
So you basically do it just like for your process, just like you recommend to us as the contractor to the homeowner, right? You make sure you're aligned from the get-go.
Yeah. Yeah. I don't want to spend all this time developing this brainstorm that I have and then hope at the end that it's exactly what you thought it would be. You know, I want to talk about that brainstorm before I start taking my pencil to paper and start sketching out different ideas and making sure that they're kind of in the same realm of what you're thinking about for your brand.
And so 0 times after you got through the truck wrap, 90 days later, 0 times.
Yeah, that's never happened.
That's a crazy claim to make after 25 years, man. I believe you because I'm working with you and I see the results you have and the people you've worked with, the biggest companies in the country. But you know how crazy of a claim that is to make? If I said in 25 years, buy the end product, yeah, there's plenty of people that didn't like our price or didn't like our warranty, blah, blah, blah. They wanted a cheaper deal, whatever. But through the install, if I said after 25 years, 0 people have said I didn't like the install and I was unhappy or dissatisfied with the results, it's impossible. Do you know how strong of a brand claim that is to make for KickCharge? That is insane. That's awesome. So 0 have been unhappy. What are the most common language you hear after 90 days after? What do people say?
Often it's I wish I'd done this sooner. The dividends that they see as far as recognition within their own communities surprises them, whereas they didn't realize or understand how well and what an impact the brand change would have to them. Like we talk about that up ahead, but then until they experience it, they're sometimes surprised by it. I think also, you know, you have a lot of people that are apprehensive about the entire process. And sometimes we get to the finish line and we present the options and they're not sure about what I'm suggesting that they do. And a lot of them will say, you know what, listen, I trust you. You're the expert. Let's just run with this. And then it is always, you get that phone call a few months later saying, oh my God, I'm so glad we did this. I'm so glad I listened to you and that we went ahead with this. The response has been amazing, you know? So thinking about it from that perspective, you know, they really, I think often are surprised. And then when the financial stuff starts rolling in, like the stuff that's happening with Jason and even Timo's Heating and Air in Palm Springs is another guy. We started with him $750 to start 6 years ago, and he's going to do 10 million this year, you know? And wow. he was a guy that also, you know, when him and his dad, he was second generation, his dad was like, why are we changing? We see that a lot, right? Second generation comes in and the old man, he's like, I don't understand why we need a new logo. And the younger generation's like, Dad, we got to change. So that was another example. We changed it. And now progressive. And now he's like our biggest cheerleader. He's like, I'm so glad we did it. You know, that was the best thing. I'm like, yeah, well, you didn't think you were a little scared to do it.
You showed me that right on a deep dive. That is powerful, man. The Timo's situation.
The Timo's one, it's just, you know, and when we went out to see his location in Palm Springs, again, you know, we manage everything for him. So we do his digital and his SEO, like everything. But like, you know the numbers, but until you walk into the office and then you see, you know, 15 vans line up in the back and all these employees rolling in, and then you realize the impact of that brand and the work we've done for them and how many lives have been changed because of it. So, you know, that's great to hear. But like his dad is a perfect example of somebody that wasn't convinced that they needed a new brand. The son was convinced. But 3 months after, he was like, oh my God, this is totally the best thing we ever did. And now that brand has become their most valuable asset. And that's the part too, where people don't understand is like, look at the Ghetto brand. Like how much is that brand worth and what it's built up to? You know, it's insane.
It's been established. It's hundreds of millions of dollars.
Yeah, it's insane. Like Ken always tells me I should have charged him more for it, which is funny, right?
Yeah, I mean, literally, like, I don't know, in a 4-year period. I mean, and I just want to be transparent. Like he hired all of the experts, right? He hired the messaging expert. He hired the brand experts with KickCharge, right? You just said you just did another website for him. Like, but he tied 3 or 4 experts together, and literally in a 6 or 7 year period, it's worth a few $100 million. I mean, he took it over at $7 million in sales.
Yeah.
In a few years, I mean, 6 years, it's worth a few $100 million. I mean, that's crazy.
Yeah.
That's when you don't cut corners. And I mean, tell me about, you told me intimately about, he gave you an image and you ended up saying, I think we need to flip it into watercolor, right? Tell me about that, because that's a pretty cool story.
Yeah, we wanted to just try to make it look like Norman Rockwell had painted it. And that's ultimately how we approached it. And the funny thing about the Ken's brand is when we started it, we're trying to imagine what this 10-year-old boy would look like, right? So how do I reference what a 10-year-old boy would look like from 50 years ago? Like, where do I find that image? And does he have freckles and everything? So we wound up I hired my neighbor's kid who was 10 years old. We bought overalls for him and the newspaper hat, and we dressed him up. And we took photos of him, and then we based the brand actually on this my neighbor's kid. And then we sent it to Ken, and he's like, oh, this would be cool if we made it after my own kid. So I'm like, all right, now we got to like redo the whole face and everything. But we basically took the face of Ken's kid and we put it on the illustration. And we made it, that was the intent, make it look like Norman Rockwell had painted it, right? Because Norman Rockwell evokes a lot of very specific imagery, right? It's all, nice, and everything is done right, and it's honest and it's trustworthy. And all those buzzwords come to mind when you see that visual of that boy holding that flashlight,
Yeah, the watercolor is powerful.
Yeah.
And so here, look, so we've been on about an hour and a half. I mean, I think people know more about branding than they ever want to know. They absolutely trust KickCharge, right? I mean, shit, pass it off to KickCharge. About Dan Antonelli, one of the things that blows me the most away is, so I know that you're an avid bike rider, and I know that you sponsor the cyclist team. Tell us about that. Who is Dan Antonelli as like Lance Armstrong Tour de France? Tell us about what you do for cycling.
Yeah, I mean, I race bicycles, not very well, but I try.
What does category 3 mean? I saw you're like a category 3 rider.
Yeah, it's just a classification. So category 5 is the worst, and category 1 is the best. So I'm right in the middle. I'm not showing off. I'm not falling behind. I'm right in the middle. So yeah, I mean, I ride and I ride about 150 miles a week, and I train about 8 to 10 hours a week.
Dude, 150 miles a week?
Yeah. I
know you said today you were on a bike ride. Tell me about that.
Yeah, today was 50-mile Hammerfest for 2.5 hours. So it was pretty, I'm pretty shot right now, but it's all good.
Are those like marathon type races, like 5K? Is that like a cyclist type of 5K? What is that?
No, I mean, it was with about 10 guys that we call them mammals. Mammals means middle-aged men in lycra. So there was about 10 of us, and yeah, we just drilled it for 2.5 hours, and it's a good workout. We start pretty early, and then you're back at the house by noon, and you've got a pretty solid workout. I'm not racing this weekend, so I can do a ride like that. On weekends that I'm racing, then I can't do a longer training ride on the weekend. Well,
Dan, I mean, we covered a lot of land here. Is there anything specific you want to cover we didn't cover?
We talk about trademark. Yeah, I mean, I think we covered an awful lot. Yeah. I would say that if guys want to, there's some other webinars that I've given on our KickCharge site that if they wanted to check out, they could certainly do that. It's under the tips and tools. And there is, it's called KickCharge U webinars. So there's ones on print advertising. There's ones on digital. There's ones on truck wraps. I would say the truck wrap one would be great for anyone that wants to get a truck wrap and is working with another designer. Just watch that webinar so you understand what it is that you're buying. It talks about tips to look for when you're doing truck wraps. There's one about trademarking, which again is important. we didn't really discuss why you need to trademark your logo as much as maybe we could have, but
Yeah, talk about that. Give us
basically just
gotta know.
protect your brand, right? Make sure no one else can use it. So as soon as you finish a logo with any designer, I would suggest you get it trademarked. It's about usually around $1,000 to $1,500 to get it federally registered trademark. Put the TM next to your logo as soon as you get it completed. That signifies that your logo is protected or in the process of being protected. So I think it's really important. That asset, is something that you want to own. So make sure you cover and protect that asset. This way, if anyone does use it, you have a much stronger legal standing than copyright. Like, people get confused with copyright and trademark. Copyright, anything you create is inherently copyrighted. It just has less legal teeth than a trademark. Trademark is irrefutable. Anyone uses it, they're basically, you can take them to court and you can collect damages, you can do all those things. But copyright is a little weaker in terms of a legal standing. But we have a whole webinar on that. I have a whole webinar on naming too, like if anybody wants to learn more about the specifics about naming. And then we have other topics too that the rest of the team has put together.
Well, look, search Dan Antonelli, KickCharge Creative on every site, YouTube, Facebook, you name it. You're going to get more information than you ever could have imagined by yourself. And here at 99 HVAC Group, we only bring the top professionals for every subject. You guys asked about branding. You ask about vehicle wraps. You post your vehicle wrap. Say what's wrong. Some of you say use Fiverr. Some of you say use 99designs.com, which I used. I don't have any complaints, but the damage could have been insurmountable by choosing the wrong logo. And so Dan Antonelli, the true expert in branding and creative, literally responsible for a few $1 billion himself worth of HVAC, plumbing, and electrical service revenue with a brand, is here joining us. And so he is wrapping up. And you guys have any questions, make sure you hit it in the comments. Dan's a member of the group. He will follow back up and answer them. And, I appreciate everybody tuning in. And Dan, I really appreciate your time, man. So
thanks, guys. Yeah, and I see that there's a few questions that I could respond to later on the Facebook chat. But yeah, it was great to be here. And listen, I mean, we joke about the book. This is the book, by the way. It's not about me making money on the book. Honestly, it's about you understanding what it is that's important about the brand. So when I wrote this book, I wrote it for guys just like you. I didn't write it for designers. I wasn't trying to teach designers how to design logos or anything like that. I wrote it so people would understand why a small business brand is so important to their business. So, again, like I said, I seriously only make like $1.50 on the book. So it's not really about trying to sell you a book. But I think you will find it of value. I think you will better understand a lot of the things that we talk about today, in the book. So, like I said, if you want it, great. You can get it from our website too. And I'll autograph it. It'll be worth hundreds as soon as I'm dead. So you'd have that going for you too. So.
A few $100s, right? Not a Derek Jr. signature. All right, guys. Thanks for tuning in. Dan, hey, man, I sincerely appreciate you being here.